Welcome back to the Brew Bot Development Series. Remember last episode when I said this? I'm hoping that now I'll be putting out more interesting videos and faster. Of course, I can't promise anything. I'm still going to upload when it feels right to, but I do believe that that will be faster than every 2 months. You probably don't remember that, because that was 12 years ago, and most of the people who watched that video have since passed away. But to those of you who are left, I can explain. Actually, no, I can't. None of what I have to show today is so insane that it warrants me having gotten wrapped up to the extent that I did. I just kinda kept making things, and I also wanted to have lots of cool visual stuff to show, and that was not happening at first. Then I got close to July and figured I'd just keep going and upload this one on the 19th, because July 19th marks the 4th year of me uploading to this channel, and the first full year of uploading the Brew Bot Development Series, since I started that on the last channel anniversary. So how far have we come in the last 12 months? Is the game where I thought it would be? Have I finally learned how to code? Well, to answer those questions, I'm gonna have to catch you guys up on where we are now. Except for the last one. I can go ahead and just tell you, no, I haven't. So let's start with a short recap. For those of you who are new here or just don't remember, Brew Bot is a 3D action platformer. Well, no, it's a glitchy thing where you can't really do anything, but it's gonna be a 3D action platformer. I've never made a game before this, and I'm making this one all on my own. I do have some Blender experience, and I've played around in Unity and Unreal Engine a little bit, but that's all. I've seen part 1 of every game dev tutorial out there, but I've never seen part 3 of any of them. But finally committing to learning this stuff for real, I went ahead and created a new Unreal Engine project. Why Unreal Engine? Because they have a node system instead of actual coding, so that way I don't need to learn this stuff for real. But as much as that did help me learn how coding works, ultimately it's just not a great fit for my game. The engine is also very convoluted and just not really how I want to learn. Plus, Borderlands 4 was made in Unreal Engine, so instead I'm going to use Godot. This engine came to my attention thanks to you guys recommending it. And just looking at the interface, I knew this was the way that I actually wanted to make a game. It's simple, it's clean, it's out of the way, expandable, and it's open source. But I lost all of my Unreal Engine skill and had to start all over again learning a game engine. It took like an hour to figure out how to make a cube, but that cube was a real, good old-fashioned, artisanal, handcrafted cube. Not one of those artificial, instant gratification Unreal Engine cubes. Fast forward a few months and I'm quite comfortable in this engine, including actually coding things. The GD script language they use here is really easy to read and look at. Well, it would be if I wrote halfway decent code. Some people might think it's weird for me not to show how I learned coding, since at least to me that was the big hurdle that kept me from making a game. But there's really nothing to show. I just started doing it and it got easier. But after a while, things slowly came together and started feeling like an actual game, which was a bit of a problem, because I don't know what the game is yet. See this image right here? That's literally what I'm working with. This is the plan. So I had to answer some questions. Is there combat? How much combat is there? What kind of combat? Fast or slow? Is there lots of enemies or is there just a few? How long are the levels gonna be? How many levels are there gonna be? Is it one big level? Is it open or linear? Is there any currency? What do you buy with it? If there's no currency, then why explore the level? If the combat isn't as fun as the platforming, then why is it there? If I don't take inspiration from good games, then I'm not learning from what already works. But if almost nothing about the game is original, then it's not even worth making. Turns out there are thousands of questions and quandaries to ponder when it comes to making your own game, which is something I was not at all prepared to face coming into this. I thought learning how to code was going to be the hard part, but that was so much easier than chiseling down a super vague feeling into an actual video game with mechanics and features that all flow together and are also within a realistic scope. And I do have all of those details, or at least most of them, figured out right now. But a few months ago, by the end of last episode, I was still mostly running off of this PNG right here. And that brings us to the beginning of the work that you guys haven't seen yet. This footage spans from late February to mid-June. I did record commentary over most of this footage, and I'll use bits and pieces of that where I think it's valuable, and not the 90 hours of me muttering about variables. So, back in late February, I had just made this little room. This was less of an actual area and more just for prototyping's sake. I also got some basic combat working, including a little crowd of onion enemies that chase you. What, they don't look like onions to you? I also added a cylinder that shoots rectangular prisms at you, and a big capsule that punches you in the face with a sphere. We'll get around to turning those violent shapes into enemies later. But another facet of this game, besides the platforming and combat, is a decoration system. Think of how collecting decorations in Little Big Planet works. Yes, I'm about to do that thing where I say that my game is just 2 other games put together. But then imagine those Little Big Planet decorations being used more like Animal Crossing decorations, which you use to decorate the cafe area, which functions kind of like the castle in Super Mario 64. Also, Dark Souls. This either sounds like the coolest thing ever, or you just lost all faith in this project. But trust me, it's gonna be cool. Unfortunately, you can't just say stuff and then it happens. I have to actually type all that crap out and make it work and stuff. So you best believe I considered scrapping the whole system several times. But after much deliberation, I found it to be crucial to this game. Without it, I just don't feel confident that this game will be worth playing. So let's at least get this decoration system started. I'm imagining you basically have like a circle you can set down, and then we can keep adding variables for different unique things. But I think if we just export these 3 variables, then we can just set it up over here in this menu, and I can do all of that really quick, never opening any code, just doing that in these menus over here. Export item type. And look at that, you can just type it in over here. Look at that, it uppercases it and gets rid of the underscore. That's incredible. So I have the decoration pickup, but it's not being stored anywhere, so I need to make an inventory of some kind. I started by creating a dictionary, which is a list of names paired with data, and for each item to hold its own data, I made another dictionary, meaning I'm storing the decorations in a dictionary of dictionaries, which is probably not the right way to do that, but we need some visuals to confirm it's actually working. We'll go ahead and make a Godot inventory screen and see if it's actually storing and saving that data there. What is that? It needs to be, obviously it needs to be like scaled up or something. Let's try that. It did something though. Collectible 3, new test collectible, test collectible. Oh, those are the 3 items. Cool, those are the names of 3 different test collectibles I've picked up. So that's at least working. But I want to have little icons for these too. At first, I wanted to just use these icons that Godot generates for the mesh preview, but apparently that's pretty buried and hard to access. Not impossible since it's open source, but I just don't know how to do it. So instead, I'm going to do this the way that I've always assumed other games do. I made a cube underneath the map and a placeholder mesh which swaps out for whatever needs a picture. Then I've got a camera aimed at it which gets a screenshot and saves it. Then that image is retrieved from the files for the decorations icon. Yeah. Wow. Alright, that's technically working. You just have to imagine its name is a decoration of some kind, and the image isn't a gray pyramid, and the menu is not a normal map, and there's a game attached to the rest of this. But hey, this is a good start to our decoration system. It's missing the actual decoration part, but you can pick stuff up now. Most of these decorations aren't going to just be sitting there though. They're going to be behind some kind of secret, so I went ahead and threw together the most uninspired secret possible just to test how I'll make those in the future. The coding for this is really simple. It's just an area that reads for Brew Bot's damage collider, and if it connects, it moves the brick model back to a point and then opens the door. I kept experimenting with improving and expanding this test room by making a second room connected to this one, which was partially to keep testing using CSG shapes to build levels, and also just to have more area to use for testing platforming and combat. This second room is stupid, I deleted it later, but the little slide section did bring my attention to some movement issues. One of those issues is that the player doesn't have any control while sliding down a slope, but I'd really like the player to have some amount of steering, so I slightly rewired how sliding and velocity functions and got that working. Working in this context means that I haven't found out that it's extremely broken yet. Another little quirk of the platforming is there's no ledge grab animation, so I should probably make that real quick. I got a screenshot to get a rough approximation of how far his arms need to stretch, and stretched them about that much. So this is the end of his hands, this is his arm. His arm definitely just reaching up won't make it, so his arms are going to need to stretch up. Having an actual animation for ledge grabbing inspired me to make this little tower, which you can climb by grabbing onto these little gaps, but you can't land anywhere, so it's kind of a wall climbing section. That was so cool I deleted it, and then started to realize how bad the camera was, specifically when it gets pushed up against a wall. It just does not look or feel right. I popped open Valheim, which I know has a third-person camera that lets you do this, and I took some notes on how it seemed to be working, and it almost looks like this is happening. So, probably thinking something along the lines of, screw that, I went ahead and replaced the current camera that I didn't make with a different camera that I didn't make. This time it's the Phantom Camera add-on, which is pretty complicated and so won't be easy to alter or add code into, but it works so smoothly that I've just gotta give it a try. And then I instantly needed to alter it and add code into it, because it doesn't seem to have controller support, or maybe I just couldn't find it. So I added some controller inputs that turn the camera, which was confusing and did take a long time, but it got me more familiar with the camera and how it works. I also made it so that when you ledge grab, the camera slowly moves up above Brew Bot. That way you can look around more freely without the ledge catching the spring arm of the camera. Alright, the camera feels better, and Brew Bot has an animation for ledge grabbing, but over on the combat side of things, the enemies are still default shapes. I know, the sphere enemy has become iconic, but I think it's really time we give an actual model and some animations for this guy. Now I do have a lot of hours in Blender, but I'm really just okay at it. Like I can whip up something decent in about an hour, but if you gave me 10 hours, I'd just whip the decent thing up in the first hour, and then spend the next 9 trying to figure out how to make it look better than decent. And it would probably just end up looking worse. But you know, decent is all you really need, as long as you commit to an art style that doesn't demand anything more. Which is secretly why indie games are low poly. It's not because it's better for performance, or even really because it's nostalgic. It's because no solo developer is good enough at modeling to make a high poly game that looks good and has clean topography. It's just way easier and safer to work with less polygons. I'm generally going more for a GameCube art style than N64, but this onion enemy is going to be extra crunchy, since they're going to be small and there's going to be a lot of them. You can see I actually used the leaf texture for the onion grass or whatever on his head. The more I reuse textures like this, the smaller the game's file size is going to be. But I do have to make an onion texture, because sometimes you just have to make an onion texture. I almost always use Sprite for my textures, which I've gotten some negative feedback on, which is partially because drawing textures like this by hand, textures which are ultimately pretty simple patterns, is kinda slow and time consuming for no reason. But it's mostly because other people are jealous that I'm having fun in a cool looking software, while they're all depressed generating textures in some complicated application that they're paying monthly for. There's no two ways about it. Hand painting noise is stupid, but something about it is really enjoyable. I like handcrafting my textures rather than generating them, because it feels less mathematical and more artistic, even when it's literal noise. And any opportunity to just draw something and not type numbers in boxes is a huge breath of fresh air when almost everything else I do is pure numbers and boxes. Even animating a character in Blender feels more technical than artistic. Speaking of which, the animating step is coming up pretty soon for this onion enemy, because he's all textured now. I need to rig him first, which is where you set up bones to control certain parts of the mesh. Technically, this is just skinning since I'm just adding bones. Rigging is where you actually add controls to make things easier. But this enemy is so simple and he's gonna have like 5 animations, so this is good enough. Okay, now I can actually pose him around, which means I can make animations by keyframing those poses onto the timeline, like an idle animation, a casual walking animation, an angry chasing animation, and a getting punched in the face animation. RIP when that's one of your 4 animations. I could import this model with its animations into Godot right now, but let's just get the other enemies made while we're here in Blender. I'll do the golem enemy next. Right now he's just a capsule, but he's gonna look a little more like this. Hopefully a lot more like this, but realistically it's probably going to be somewhere in between. I started with his head, which is a tree stump. I should be able to reuse a lot of textures here, like the mossy wood texture. I also got that big eyeball from the onion and put that on him. Then I started making his body out of a sphere with the grass texture, but he started looking like Wario at some point, so I switched his rock shoes out for log legs. See, you guys are learning all kinds of useful techniques here. After that, I made his arm out of a cylinder and used another cylinder for his hand, which is supposed to be like a log slice or something. I went back into Sprite and made a vine texture for his arms, which I think looks pretty cool. Let's go ahead and make a rig, then we can make some animations. I also made it so that his head can come up off of his body and there's vines connecting it. Again, I started with an idle animation, and then I made a walking animation and a chase animation, and then a punch animation. Now I'll make an animation for getting parried, since that's the intended way of fighting this guy. His head's gonna shoot up and come back down, and he'll be stunned for a moment. Now we've just gotta make a model for the bow enemy. I've already made a sketch for this enemy too, so I kinda know what I'm going for. I started with a cube and shaped that into a rock. Then I put a rock texture on, which really makes it look like a rock. Then I went ahead and brought the eye in from the golem, because I guess every enemy's gonna have that now. I also took one of the legs from the moss ball enemy and modified it a bit, which looking back on is extremely dumb and stupid, because this is just a barely modified cylinder that I could have easily remade. Now I need to make the actual bow that sits on top of his head, and some vines holding it in place, and then make some animations. I'll make one animation where the bow draws back, and then one where it fires and the arrow disappears, because after that there's going to be a projectile spawning and shooting out that uses that arrow model. I don't actually know if this is how you do that or not, but we'll try it. So now we can import these models into Godot and replace those old placeholder meshes, starting with the bow enemy. I've also got to program the animations to play at the right times, but pretty soon I was jumping around getting shot at by a rock. I also made it so that the arrows shrink down before they disappear. We'll do the onion enemy model next, which is missing an animation. the getting punched in the face one, the one that took the longest to make. Thank you, Blender. So I furiously remade that real quick and programmed his animations. Okay, let's see how that worked. I don't know, we'll see. I think it's gonna work. Is he in the floor? He's still on the floor. If I put him up in the air and he has time to fall and land. Oh, I see, that's his actual. So he should be like right here. Yeah, there we go. He's not in the floor anymore. Let's see. Oh, no way. Look at that. Oh crap, what? Well, hey, that's working pretty well. You know, it's not done, but it's like an actual enemy now. After that, I fixed whatever this is called by making him stop for a moment after bumping into you or after getting punched. And I also had to fix the look direction being wrong in a few cases. I also made it so that he jumps up whenever you aggro him. Alright, there's the onion enemy all visually updated. It's insane how different the combat feels having actual enemy models and animations that react to you. But let's make these onion enemies even better. I want to make it so that they roam around within a certain distance of their starting point. So I'm going to define that distance and have it pick random points within that, and then have them move to those points after waiting some random amount of time, which got to a working stage pretty quickly. Now this is starting to feel more like an actual AI, instead of a sphere with a single predictable chasing behavior. Okay, let's get the golem enemy imported real quick. Replace the mesh, program the animations, fix some weird glitches, and there we go. I went ahead and made another animation on him for when you repost after parrying, since that hit is going to deal extra damage. And to make sure that the punching hitbox is accurate, I made it track on to the position of his actual hand bone. After getting all those states and animations made, the parrying works pretty well, but I want to try and make the rest of the combat feel better. So I improved how the punching animations looked a little bit and made them play more dynamically, but I think I can make the punching feel better still. I recorded some sound effects with some sticks and brought a few of those into Godot. Then I had it pick one of those at random each time you punch, which worked out pretty well. Then I made some getting hit sound effects for the onion. Okay, the combat is good enough for now. I'll find more things to fix later, but let's change gears for a minute. I kinda just wanted to see how cool I could make this room look, so I messed around with the lighting for a minute. Again, this isn't going to be an actual level, so it might seem like a waste of time to be doing any of this, but I want to work towards some kind of visual style, or at least get some ideas before I actually start designing and putting together real levels. I went ahead and deleted the ceiling off of the room so you can see the extremely low quality skybox, because I want to make an actually somewhat decent skybox for once. But first, I'm gonna have to mess around with this different crappy one, because I need to figure out how exactly I can even make a skybox, and a panoramic image like this seems like a good choice to start with. I'm also not using Photoshop anymore, so I'm gonna be also getting used to a new image editor while making this. From my understanding, I've pretty much just gotta make this image tile horizontally, so I shifted it over with the affine effect, which puts the seam somewhere that you can actually clean it up. But as you can see, this is a pretty obvious seam that's gonna take a lot of blending to hide. I didn't think it would ever actually look believable without using some kind of generative AI, but with a little painting over some things and using the good old-fashioned cloning brushes, this looks alright actually, until I tried using it, which was when I learned that there's another aspect of tiling to consider, and that's the top of the skybox, where everything gets pushed together. The very top should be one single color with no distinguishable patterns that might get distorted. So I set down a blue rectangle at the top and faded it onto the sky by softly erasing the bottom. And hey, look at that, that's awesome. If this skybox fit this scene at all and wasn't all microwaved looking, I might actually consider using it. We'll leave it there for now, because I have a different idea. Instead of the ceiling being completely gone, I can just open it up in some areas by putting subtractive shapes into it. That way, there's holes in the ceiling for light to come in and for you to see the skybox. Not a full view of the skybox, but just little sections, which means I can make it more abstract and mysterious looking. And bad looking. So let's use this image of some water ripples in the forest, shade it green, and see how that looks. Alright, sure. It doesn't tile at the sphere seams, but I can just hide those since you won't be seeing the whole skybox anyways. I played around with the lighting a little bit more and added some buildings up outside of the holes in the ceiling. That way there's a few distance details to kind of make it feel like you're underneath an actual place. And what the heck, let's try putting some enemies up here. I can't enter the aggro range of the golem enemy to get him down here, but if I put some onions up here, some of them will roam off the edge and fall into here. That could be a really weird and inefficient way of having random amounts of a certain enemy enter a room at random intervals. Alright, this skybox is getting on my nerves, but I've got an idea. I really want it to do a rippling, wavy water thing. That way there's some subtle movement above you when you look up through the ceiling. This does mean that I have to learn something completely new though. I've never messed around with making custom shaders like this, so it's gonna be a bit tricky, and require lots of reinterpreting incorrect AI suggestions. I started by trying to write the shader in GD script, but it turns out Godot uses a different language for shaders. But eventually I was able to cobble something together and sorta understand it. I'm pretty sure what I'm doing is, I'm using this noise map that I made to distort the UVs of the water texture. In each frame, I'm sliding that noise image across the underlying water texture. I thought I had ironed everything out, but it still wasn't working, which was very frustrating.
Oh, look, I messed this up. This is supposed to say minus, not equals. Oh gosh.
Once I slowed it down a bit and lowered the intensity, this Nightmare Realm skybox turned into exactly what I was imagining. Great, now I want to just sit here and write shaders all day. But alas, that's not something I can afford to get wrapped up in right now, because there's other much more important, much more boring things to attend to. Like the camera. I hate working on the camera, but I've got to, because as cool as it is to look up at the skybox in first person, entering and exiting first person is pretty jarring. So I spent a couple hours making it so that the first person camera faces where the third person camera was facing when you enter, and when you exit, it brings the third person camera to face where the first person camera's angle was. I also made it so that you can zoom the camera in and out using either the scroll wheel or up and down on the D-pad, and you can reset the zoom by middle clicking or pressing right on the D-pad. By this point, it had been 2 months since I had started, so we're about halfway through the footage right now. I've got quite a bit of visual stuff done, plus some nice improvements to the combat, but I haven't really gotten back to the collectible decorations that I started with, so I returned to working on those, but with a slightly different view on how these collectibles would work. I'm not going to go way in detail since I ended up going back on this idea later, but I basically wanted there to be treasures you collect and bring back to the cafe to sell. But then there was also going to be decorations, but the treasures were kind of also decorations too, and it was just stupid. It might work as its own game, but it started taking over the whole decoration system, and so it had to go. The idea did shape some of the decorations I made next, including this clay pot. Of course, this could still just be a decoration, or it could even be something you break open for money. After that, I made a stone gear, and then I made a gold coin. I also made some actual decoration items, like this table, which I then reorganized into a chair. Then I made a little clay plate saucer thing, and then a fossil. And lastly, I finally got around to making a model for the coffee beans. I made all of that garbage before making a model for the coffee bean pickup. For the decoration icons, I went ahead and just got renders of these things in Blender with a transparent background, and saved those images in a folder. Yeah, remember that whole photo room thing at the beginning? Well, I'm not going to use it. Unfortunately, the photo room system was just too janky and unreliable, and would probably cause performance issues or longer loading screens later. I also just like having more control over how these renders turn out, so I can get closer or change lighting to highlight details on certain objects. After that, I went ahead and imported those models, starting with the clay pot. I made a randomized spawning system for these treasures, which uses several spawn points that you place, and it spawns the treasure randomly at one of these locations, excluding the spot that it was last collected at. That way, if you want to farm a pickup, you can't just keep hitting the same spot over and over. That being said, the decoration collecting isn't going to work the way I thought it would when I made this. Most decorations are going to be picked up just once, and then duplicates can be purchased for coins. But I don't know, there might be some decorations that do keep spawning. And worst case scenario, I can at least use this system for spawning enemies randomly, or breakables or containers or something. Once I got all of that set up, and I had the other models in here as well, I started messing with their materials. I wanted them to have a material overlay which makes them stand out, which is when I discovered the outline parameter, specifically the X-ray mode. This ended up working perfectly on Brew Bot's materials to make him visible through objects. The only issue is, the spring arm on the camera won't let him get behind any objects. A spring arm is a ray that's casted from the camera towards the character. It reads for anything getting in between the camera and the player, and pushes the camera in front of that object to keep that from happening, which is great for keeping the camera from going through walls, but I'd kinda also like to be able to walk behind some objects. But as it turns out, this is pretty complicated. There's a way I can kinda do this, but not with this camera add-on, because of how it tracks and sets its position. So instead of changing the camera at all, I'm just gonna make it so that certain meshes don't catch the spring arm, like this wooden bridge thing. That way, I still get that effect without risking anyone poking the camera through a mesh and finding a secret or something, since a mesh like this wooden bridge just isn't hiding anything. I could even eventually make it so that these meshes fade out whenever the camera gets really close to them. That way it doesn't look as glitchy if your camera goes through them. After that, I used that little secret room to hide the table decoration, which is made to be a unique collectible rather than a respawning one. The script on the unique one-time collectibles checks your inventory and then deletes itself in the scene if it's already found there. Later on, I'm going to want to make this use a separate permanent collections list of all the items you've ever picked up. But for now, I need to fix how these decorations actually hold their data, because that whole dictionary full of dictionaries thing is getting real old real fast. So instead, I'll have them store their data to a resource node. That way each of these decorations exists as a separate object that can be referenced by ID rather than just existing in a script and having to deliver all of that data every time. Alright, that should be a lot easier to work with. Wait, I made a coffee bean model earlier. Let's bring that in real quick. I made the material just a bit emissive so it stands out slightly. And I also made it fly towards you and disappear when you pick it up, which is actually just a visual effect. The hitbox for the pickup is actually just huge, and then stops reading once you enter it and gives you one coffee bean. Then the actual mesh component for the coffee bean starts chasing you, and when it gets within a certain distance, the whole object deletes itself. I like this. Everything's starting to look a lot better, but I'd like to make this level keep going just a bit further. I want to see if I can just keep creating areas and have it all still kind of feel connected. So I made a brick tunnel that connects to a second room. This is going to be a circular room that you go down into. While I was making this, I found a little spot here to put in an extra temple room, which could extend as far as I wanted if this were an actual level. The ceiling in this room is going to be open, but with some tree leaves surrounding it. So I made a crappy texture and model for that and set some of those up. I also created the main pathway out of this room. And I made another reachable area over here that you can get to by high jumping. Again, the actual area that this goes to could be much more extensive or interesting in an actual level. But this room now exits to 4 different areas, which is pretty awesome. I want this game to be not open world, but like a very branching linear kind of thing. I drew up some concepts for that. These points here are not rooms, they represent entire levels. This is very much a Dark Souls inspired level layout, where the whole thing is one world because it's all connected and loads seamlessly, but it's still broken into distinct areas. I also drew up loading and unloading points, where theoretically I can have the next area load at this first checkpoint and then unload the last area at this checkpoint. I'm assuming most games with this kind of layout do something similar, but I'm gonna have to get the current systems a bit more functional before making levels. And it was while fighting some onions that I realized that the combat is really bad. Specifically, it feels like you're running away the whole time, and then you sometimes swing back around for a hit. It's like you're riding on a chariot or a motorcycle or something, and it isn't that enjoyable. It reminds me of the combat from Medieval, a game that has definitely inspired me, but not the combat. So I'm gonna slow down Brew Bot just a little bit, and make it so that he stops whenever he punches, but I'll also make it push him forward a little bit too. It felt wrong having the jab punch push me forward, so I made the push force negative so it sends you backwards. Alright, that is a big improvement. I went back to creating more areas in this level, but I started noticing something really bad. The areas I'm creating are not the ones I want to be creating, which is because I'm creating them for Brew Bot's current movement system, and that movement system currently has nothing interesting besides the ledge grab. So everything I'm making is ledge grab based. You don't see much ledge grabbing based platforming, which is because of how sucky and unfun it is. This is a huge problem, because creating interesting levels that are fun to explore is my #1 goal for this game. And Brew Bot's subpar and awkward movement is making this into a subpar and awkward level. I realized at this point that the tools your character uses to traverse a level are the same tools that you afford yourself to build that level with. So Brew Bot's movement needs to feel better, and I have to have something else mildly interesting about it. So the first thing I did here was make it so that you can hold down the jump button to go higher or press it quicker to jump lower. That way you can just barely tap if you're just trying to clear a low jump and get back on the ground sooner. I also adjusted the air physics a bit so that you have less control. But it feels like something is missing. Like there should be some extra move I can do to maneuver around. So I added a new platforming move that I think fits really well and makes the movement a bit more interesting, which is the air punch. You can punch one time while in the air, which will let you change directions or go a little bit further. It also resets fall damage, but you can't use it after a high jump. High jump also has less air control, so it doesn't just replace normal jump. I tried bringing back the wall jump for several hours, but it remained one of those things that just interferes more than it contributes. So no wall jump. Instead, I looked around for more subtle movement improvements and found exactly what I was looking for. All I did was lower the turn speed value, which is how fast the new direction is transitioned to from the current one, which added some actual weight to the character, cause now quick direction changes stop you for a moment, which is something that almost every third-person game has, and I honestly don't know the science behind it. I guess it just adds weight, like I said, but it's just weird how much better that feels, cause you'd expect snappier, more responsive controls to be more satisfying, but apparently no. When the character is like, oh crap, I'm changing directions, hold on, I can't move anymore, that somehow feels better, not worse. The last thing I did to the movement was bring back the sprinting feature, cause there were a couple areas that I just felt like running through rather than walking. I don't want you to hold sprint constantly while platforming though, cause that doesn't feel good. So I experimented with some sprint punishment features, like having a short recovery phase after finishing a sprint, or taking damage when you run into something. But both of those just made everything feel less enjoyable. So instead of punishing you for sprinting, I just altered its active functionality by lowering its turn speed. That way it's harder to steer, so you don't get very much control, just speed. It seems like balancing a powerful bonus to the player is all about finding where you can rein it in without feeling like you're punishing the player for trying to have fun or get an advantage. These changes have made this movement feel at least twice as good. Brewbot's movement went from not being good enough for the test level to the test level not being good enough for the movement. I feel like making levels that are way better than this now, which is exactly what I was looking for. But before we're done, let's make sure the combat is also caught all the way up. I'm excited to make levels now, but making enemies is kind of a nightmare at the moment, which I could not possibly have seen coming. Yeah, you guys were right again. Last episode, I set the enemies up using an inheritance system, where you have a broad enemy type, which has universal enemy behaviors and variables. Then you can narrow down to a certain category of behavior, and eventually down to that specific enemy, which sounds pretty nifty, and it actually was, since changing things at the top makes changes all the way down. But this waterfall system makes it hard to move things around, or make enemies that behave a bit out of line from the existing templates. It gets really messy really fast, and functions and variables and inheritances start getting all tangled up, and I honestly started losing track of what was happening at all. So instead, I'm gonna go for the other common system of putting classes together to create a structure, which is called composition. Instead of sending data downstream and hoping it all works out, I'll be making self-sufficient components that each perform their own functions. So health, for example, is a component. It owns the health hitbox and reads for damage areas, it updates the HP number, and it manages the UI health bar. I can throw this on any enemy that needs to have health. But if I wanted to make like an invincible enemy that's more of a level hazard, I could just not give it the health component. And as long as these components are freestanding and also communicate where they need to, you have a really airtight and convenient system. It took several hours of sorting through all of the inheritance code and putting that into the right composition nodes. But after all of that was done, the enemies do still work, and they'll be much easier to create and modify in the future. But I think the combat could use just a tad bit more on the visual side. More specifically, it's been bugging me how the HP bar shows a percentage, so instead I changed it to show the actual health value. And to give more visual information, I made it go from green to red as it takes damage. I also went ahead and made a particle effect for when enemies die. I also made damage numbers, which spawn above the health bar and move in a semi-random direction before fading out. And to wrap everything up, I improved the enemy chasing AI just a little bit, by having it work more like Brewbot's movement, where it sets a target velocity that the actual velocity gets pushed towards. I also lowered the turn speed a little bit, and this feels a lot more natural. This last few days of work has very quickly made this game feel much more promising. Of course, I'll continue to work on movement and combat all the way up until the game is published, that's just how it goes. But I don't see myself vastly changing how any of the movement or combat functions. I think we've got the big pieces down. It's simple, it's not flashy, it's enough. Once you throw in exploring and collecting and decorating, along with fun atmospheric levels and all kinds of new enemy designs and interactables and secrets, then that simple movement and combat feels like plenty enough. That's the goal. That's where I want this game to go. And after a year of this game changing shape, gaining and losing features, crossing genre lines, and narrowing in scope, I finally have a version of this game that I'm ready to lock down on. I shared a somewhat detailed plan for the game sometime last year, but it's very outdated by now. And since then, I haven't really made a complete picture, because I haven't been ready to say yes and no on a lot of these aspects. But I've got to do that now if I want to start making real progress. Otherwise, it'll just stay circular and things will just keep changing. So here's the game that I'm making. This isn't a spontaneous guess, this is the final form of months of deliberation, and the closest I can get as a one-person team to the idea that I've been wanting to make for years now. Brew Bot is a 3D action platformer with an emphasis on exploring areas for secrets and collectibles. Those collectibles being decorations for your home area, the cafe. And these decorations will be things like pieces of furniture, or things to set on countertops, or wall materials. As for the combat, it's going to be pretty basic and mostly similar to how it is now, but to not make it completely boring, you can equip 2 gadgets, which are combat abilities that cost coffee beans. That way, you're doing a little bit more than just punching and healing, and you can kind of choose your own playstyle based on your gadget combo. And as for the actual game areas, here's how I plan on having them laid out. You can see there are 2 branching points where you might take one way or you might take another. Some of these areas will be pretty open, some of them more winding and branching. All areas, however, will have 1 or 2 sub-levels, some kind of portal or secret that brings you out to a totally unrelated space. Think of it kinda like a little dungeon. These are not going to be full-blown areas. They'll be much smaller and have a single objective. They'll be a refreshing change of scenery and gameplay, and they'll let me create some of the cool environments that just don't make sense being directly connected to the actual main world. Okay, so that's generally how the gameplay will flow. But why are you even entering these levels in the first place? Well, each of the 3 bosses has a part that you need, because the game's story kicks off with the espresso machine exploding in the cafe. Your friend and boss, who runs the cafe, is panicked because the cafe can't operate without the espresso machine. So he sends you out to go find the few parts he needs, which conveniently can't be found anywhere online, and also conveniently are sitting in big open rooms with bosses in them. It's a bit of an exaggeration to say this game is going to have a story, really just a setup and a premise and then a conclusion. Just a backdrop to make what you're doing kind of make sense. I also thought about the optics of playing as a robot that goes around killing everything that moves, because it doesn't really make you feel like the good guy. So actually, the enemies you fight are not the natural inhabitants of the forest. Instead, a meteor asteroid thing that's all dark and electric and stuff blows up in the air and peppers the forest with little dark shard things. And these little fragments pull whatever material is around them together to create some kind of body for itself. Some of these creatures will just be an onion that the shard has embedded itself in, some are a larger mass of grass and roots and stumps, or maybe just a brick or something. Basically, you're not fighting forest creatures, you're fighting alien rocks that have become creatures by amalgamizing their surroundings. And that's Brew Bot. There's of course a chance I alter 1 or 2 of these things along the way, but this is the game I'm making. The decoration system is happening, the levels will be branching but overall linear, and the combat and platforming will remain fairly simple. So how far is this away? How long do I think it'll take to get the game from what we have now to this idea? I don't know. I'd like to think that things start to speed up once you're building levels and not going back and forth on ideas and experimenting quite as much, but realistically, I just don't know. A hopeful estimation would be 1 more year. I don't think that's too outlandish, since most of this first year has been me just figuring out how to make this game. Now that I've got a plan and I've got a year of experience, maybe things will start to go quicker, but there's also the chance that I've got plenty more learning to do and the game takes another 2 years to make. And I'm okay with this game taking a few years, as long as actual progress is happening and I know the game is actively moving towards release, and I'm not changing plans all the time, or expanding the scope, or trying to create a system that just isn't going to work. And to do that, I need to be delivering more consistent updates to you guys to keep myself on track. That way I don't drift off for 3 or 4 months like that again. I think maybe that time was good for developing this idea though, since there wasn't any pressure to show new progress for quite a while. But I've got the idea, I just need to make progress now. And so I'm going to be uploading every month now. Now, that being said, monthly videos are of course not going to have quite this much to show. The first couple months of this might be a bit bumpy, since I've got to get into a good swing of working on the game for the right amount of time and then editing for the right amount of time. But once it gets going, I will be really happy to be uploading more frequently again. But anyways, it's good to be back. I'm really looking forward to uploading more often and more consistently. I'm extremely grateful for you guys watching along and commenting and everything. I truly don't think I'd still be working on this game if I didn't think there were people who wanted to see it happen. So to everyone who's been following along with this series or just watching my channel in general, thank you very much. It's been a great 4 years on YouTube, and I'm not done yet. Matter of fact, I'm just getting started. Everything before this wasn't even real, didn't count. Those were just test videos. For real though, thank you all so much for watching and commenting and sharing and joining and clicking the 3 dots, clicking the magnifying glass. Anything helps. Well, some of them more than others, but either way, I really appreciate you watching. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.